Local productions on QTV are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Junia and this is Uncommon Sense. My guest today, John Tierney, is the writer for the New York Times of the Finding column in the science section. He is also co-author of a wonderful book that I have read and enjoyed called Willpower. So welcome, John. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
And we're going to visit a little bit. You have written for magazines, books, you've written for the column, of course. What attracts you? What do you respond to when you look at, what do you look for when you're deciding on a subject to write for the column?
One piece of advice that I got early from older columnists when I started doing this was, write about what you care about, what interests you. And when I used to write a column, twice a week, I used to write a column about New York City twice a week, and that's kind of that's a bit of a grind. And I would just find sometimes that I'd have an idea that day I'd be going in to write about something, and I'd be in the shower, and just something would be, I'd have heard something, and something would be on my mind, and so then I'd think maybe that's what I should write about. I mean, write about what, now that sounds a bit selfish, but I think you have to care about it first. And then aside from that, I'm really looking, especially for the science column now, for social psychology, for things about how people behave, and things that are counterintuitive. I used to say, I used to do a blog, a science blog called Tierney Lab, and the founding principles were that just because everybody believes something doesn't mean it's wrong, but that's a good working hypothesis. So,
yes, but that means you have a very interesting way of viewing things.
well, I think that the conventional wisdom, that it tends to be wrong a lot. And when John Kenneth Galbraith coined that phrase, he was talking about something that isn't simply commonly believed, but it's conventional wisdom because it's convenient wisdom. That it appeals to certain prejudices of people, or it suits people in a way. And I've usually found that when I look into something, what you think you know about it isn't really right.
Yeah, it's interesting. Long years ago, I thought, why do people do that? And I came to the conclusion, people only have so much time.
Yeah.
And it's almost easy. Conventional wisdom, they don't have to think about it.
Right, right.
And would you say you're a curious person?
Yeah, very curious, I think, and I'm always, I've always had this interest in, that you've heard something a lot, and then is that really true or not? And I'm always interested in things that, I like looking at the science of things, but I also really like that intersection with popular culture, where things that really interest people. Like I was fascinated by self-help books. That these mega sales of them and people reading them all the time. And I read some, and that's how I kind of got into this writing about willpower and things, because Chris Buckley, the comic novelist, and he's my old friend, we were complaining about the sales of these books, and we were thinking, well, let's write one of our own. And so we wrote a parody, a book called God is My Broker. And we had the 7.5 Laws of Spiritual and Financial Growth. And so I read a lot of these books, and I went all the way back to Ben Franklin. And I was really curious that as the older books seemed better, that they really, preached perseverance and hard work. And then as you got up to the present, there are some good books today, but many of them preach this idea of believe it, achieve it. This whole idea of that self-esteem is what matters, as opposed to doing things. And I wondered, why is that? Why? What happened to these self-help books that they used to preach these? And then I met through the science column. I met Roy Baumeister, the social psychologist, who he had kind of gone through the same questioning process. He had started out studying self-esteem when he got out of Princeton, and he was one of the pioneers. And people, and it seemed really promising that there were people, that successful people tended to have high self-esteem, and so just getting children to believe more in themselves would help. But then Roy discovered that the scientists had it backwards. It's not that self-esteem causes success. It's that success causes self-esteem. You know, that winning the Nobel Prize will make you feel pretty good about yourself, but feeling good about yourself will not get you to Stockholm. So he then discovered about willpower, that he started looking at dozens of personality traits to see what actually did correlate with success. And he found that the only one that really worked was self-control, that it actually predicted how well a student would do in college, their grades. It predicted it even better than IQ did. So he got very interested in this whole topic of what is self-control, how does it work?
Does what he found apply to all the different personality types?
I think self-control is a universal thing. I mean, it's that when they do surveys around the world, and they've done these in all these different cultures, they find that, and they ask people, what's your biggest failing? It'll be, lack of self-control. They want more willpower, and that's their biggest desire. Nobody thinks they have enough willpower, I think, because, and it's because, none of us do. It's this finite resource that we deplete, so we run out of it. That's one of the problems.
Talk a little about decision fatigue and relationship. This is in the book, and I thought it was just a wonderful way. It's a wonderful self-check, about where you are in the in your energy for decisions.
Right.
And to respect that, as I told you before the program. It explained to me something I never understood about myself and never particularly admired, that I just sort of ran out of energy to make decisions, and I finally trained myself to do it when I'm fresh.
That's great, yeah.
Which is what you're saying. So talk a little bit about decision fatigue.
Well, decision fatigue is an example of, and they were surprised to discover this, of what Roy Baumeister calls ego depletion. And that is that as you use up your willpower, as you resist temptations, as you make yourself do things, you basically deplete this source of mental energy. And they first found out about this by in a famous experiment about cookies and radishes, where people would go in and they'd have to sit in a room, and they'd skip lunch. And there was this plate of chocolate chip cookies that had just been baked, and then there was a plate of radishes. And they would be told, well, today you're in the radish condition, so please eat some radishes, but don't eat the cookies. And then they found that after they had just sat there for 10 minutes resisting this temptation, they would then give them this test of self-control. They would ask them to solve some puzzles and see how long they'd keep working. And they found that people that who'd been able to eat the chocolate chip cookies, they would work for about 20 minutes on the puzzles. But the people who had to resist the cookies and only eat the radishes, they would give up after 8 minutes. So that's less than half the time. They had depleted their self-control by resisting temptation. So after they did that experiment, and they replicated this in all kinds of ways. They even found it was true in dogs. That if you make a dog obey a sit command for a while, it has less self-control later. That gets in fights with other dogs. So they found that, and then one day a postdoctoral fellow came into the lab, and she had just been she was engaged to be married, and she had been working the night before with her fiance on their bridal registry, and they had to what kind of towel to get, what kind of flatware, everything. And she said it was just absolutely exhausted, and she felt so depleted by it, and she wondered, is this the same kind of thing that we saw with resisting temptation? So they decided to test it, and they did tests in the lab. They went to a shopping mall, and they interviewed people and they found that people who had made more decisions in the mall would give up sooner on self-control tests. And they did an online test where it was the Dell computer website, where the more choices you had to make between, am I going to get this kind of hard drive or this or that, people had less self-control afterwards. And, in fact, after I wrote about this, the Times Magazine excerpted part of Willpower. President Obama read it, and he decided, and he made the same realization you did, that he was making too many decisions. So he resolved to start cutting back on his decisions. He decided to start wearing a dark blue or gray suit every day, so he didn't have to decide what to put on in the morning. He stopped deciding what kind of meal to have. It was just let the chef decide that. Try to outsource as many decisions as you can because that's one of the real principles for self-control. Since doing the book, I've been asked to give speeches about it, and I've tried to distill some of these principles to kind of, for people to apply to their lives. And how can you improve willpower? How can you improve self-control? And there's various tips that I have, but the most important one really is that principle that Obama applied, which was to conserve your willpower. Because you can build it up, and we talk in the book, and about how you can do that, but it is going to run out every day. So you're right. I mean, the way you do to make the decisions fresh in the morning. I mean, I think never make any decision after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I think. In fact, when I did, when the New York Times Magazine excerpted that piece, and the editors read it, they said, we're not having any more meetings after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because basically by that time people are you're tired. You've been making decisions all day, and it's hard to do that. So,
is there a finite amount of time or decision that everybody has, or is it variable by person?
Well, it varies a lot. I mean, some of it's probably genetic, some of it's the way you're brought up. But one of the good things about willpower is you can think of it as a muscle that gets fatigued during the day as you use it up. But like a muscle, it can also be strengthened. That they found, and they were looking at various ways to do this, and they found, and they were trying different strategies, and they just tried one almost kind of as a throwaway, kind of as almost as the control group in the experiment. But they just sent some students home from the lab one day and said, for the next couple of weeks, just work on sitting up straight and your posture. Don't slouch when you stand, when you're sitting down, just sit up straight. Then when they came back to the lab several weeks later, they had better self-control at all kinds of tasks that had nothing to do with posture, because they had basically been strengthening that self-control muscle. And that's, I think, one reason why, there have been studies now for 80 years that have found that religious people tend to have better self-control than non-religious people. Now, part of that may be that it takes a certain amount of self-control to make yourself go to church every Sunday or Saturday, but it's also because most religions, Eastern and Western, tend to have exercises that basically strengthen that willpower muscle. Prayers, meditations, fasting. Anything you do that requires self-control will build up that willpower muscle. It strengthens it. So, and I think that's one reason we have children have always learned these things, that you have to these little tasks that just build that willpower muscle.
Interesting. Ted, my late husband would delegate almost everything away from himself, so that, and he said, I want to concentrate on what I feel is important. Mm-hmm. And so that was his philosophy.
That's that's an absolute great one. I mean, when they found, there was a really interesting study where they had people wear beepers all day long, and they would send out a message. Are you feeling a temptation right now? Or is there something that you're resisting, like a desire to sleep, a desire to eat, a desire to goof off, and they knew ahead of time that they'd done some tests and found which people scored higher on a self-control personality, and they expected that the people that had really good self-discipline and self-control would be exercising a lot of willpower during the day, and to their surprise, they found that they actually used less willpower, that they had fewer temptations during the day than other people. And they were kind of puzzled because they figured these paragons of virtue would be, resisting. They'd be like, but what they had done was kind of like Odysseus tying himself to the mast, so he can't be lured by the sirens. They had structured their lives to minimize temptation, and so they didn't go to all-you-can-eat buffets. They didn't keep a bowl of candy on their desk.
Well, can you apply this to a marriage? I mean, you and your wife?
Yes. I mean, one piece of advice, when Roy Baumeister did his experiments and found out about this ego depletion effect, that, that people would use up their self-control, he was talking with a marriage therapist, and the guy said, that's really interesting, because for a long time now I've been telling couples who are having problems to go home from the office earlier. And that sounds kind of counterintuitive. If you're having problems at home, why do you want to lengthen the time, to have more time for conflict? But he thought it was because basically these couples, they were using up all their willpower at the office. And so they'd get home and they had nothing left, and they had and so, they get irritated by each other. They didn't have any patience left. So, I mean, that's one obvious thing I do, is try to keep that, save some of your willpower for your family. Don't give it all up at the office.
Is it hard to be married to a writer, or is that really a big plus, or is that irrelevant?
It's got pluses and minuses. You have common interests, and you share a lot of taste together, and you can relate exactly there. But then there's also, I think, being in the same business, you kind of, if one person is doing well and the other isn't, my literary agent, Chris Dahl at ICM, says that she really doesn't like to represent married couples. I mean, there are a lot of writers married to each other, but she said they're never doing well at the same time, so it's difficult. And so, she'd rather that they have kind of separate things that way. So, so that's one drawback. But there's a lot of pluses to being, to have somebody, who can read you. And now, whether you want them to edit you, that some couples do it, some don't.
So if you're on the high side and she's on the low, how do you encourage her or live with her?
Well, she's a great writer, so, and she's had her successes, and so, I mean, basically everyone goes through,
Yes.
goes through these cycles where, at a certain stage in every book you think this is just awful.
I know.
And you just try to remind...
Between two sides of a river.
Yeah, and you just try to remind them, look, it'll work out, it's worked out before, it's, but it's hard to remember that, when you're in and we do that to each other, so.
Are you an angry person?
I don't think so.
Do you think it changed with age? Did it change with age?
I'm not sure that I was angry so much. I've got these libertarian impulses that are kind of, libertarians really react. John Haidt has done a lot of research about certain types that become different, and libertarians really don't like being ordered around. They don't like stuff imposed on them. And I think I have a certain resentfulness when I feel there's a bureaucracy or there's somebody that's telling me to do something that I should be able to decide myself. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm skeptical about when you get these big findings that come out and say that everybody has to do this because we know this is right. And so I'm skeptical, but I don't think I'm angry about it. So,
What's the best way to use skepticism as a plus?
I think it's to really, be especially leery of stuff that is very convenient to your worldview. And it's hard because we all want to find things, and we all look for things that feel comfortable to us and confirm what we believe. And it's becoming, more of an issue now, I think, because of the web. People just go to their own. They have their own world that they're sharing. That think the same way and that are sharing things with each other that all confirm that we're good, they're bad. And I think you want to, try to, really question stuff that try to get other points of view and really look behind. What are the facts behind things? So there are an awful lot of, public policies that feel good to say we're going to do something about this, but then when you actually see, well, did it actually do any good? So there's a big difference between feeling good and doing good.
I always think about the government. They have a policy, or it's voted on and implemented.
Right.
But there's never, oh my God, we really messed up.
Right.
Or the unintended consequences of this,
Exactly.
maybe we shouldn't be doing this and let's wrap it up
Right.
or refashion it or something. And I think the ability to live with one's own life or wherever we are to say, oh my God, this really didn't work, and don't repeat it, but learn what you can
Yes.
and either refashion it or let it go. And I think that takes courage. People keep saying it's hard to admit you're wrong. I don't, maybe in my early life, but I don't really feel that way. I don't think that way because I'm always looking for the better answer, for the truth or the improvement. So I like people around me who will in some way get me to think, you know.
Well, that's a great thing, because I think for so many people that's hard. I mean, I see it in academia where once people get committed to their, they've got their theory, it's really hard to actually hear that it's wrong. And it's wonderful when you see someone who can say, I was wrong about that, and there's something better here. And it's one of the hardest things in business. It's funny that how you often hear these business success stories about nobody else believed in my idea, in his idea, and he was this, but he kept working at it, and it worked out. And those are the stories we hear about, and that's great. But then you think there's a lot of stories of people who believed in ideas that probably should have given up sooner if they've been listening. It's hard to know, which is part of it's luck. I mean, sometimes you stick with something and something changes so that it suddenly becomes a great idea. Something else happened, but I think being able to, to hear someone say that's wrong, and also just to be able to hear, other people's perspective.
One of the things that's so interesting to me is, I am always looking for what isn't being said, because people have already concluded, like you say, common knowledge. I think that's so lazy myself, and I keep looking for what bolt out of the blue. And Ted taught me this, actually, my late husband. He could take any kind of data or any kind of common knowledge, and he would ask a question, and that would cause the people in the room, boardrooms, wherever, conversations over breakfast, to change, because the data he put by his question or comment into a different perspective. And I had one company's president said, as hard as we prepare for board meetings with him, for everything that he can ask, he comes in, listens, makes one question or comment, and it reformulates the other way. That is a major gift to have.
It is a gift,
or develop.
Well, especially when you get people to actually change. That's really, that takes a lot of, there have been some experiments that they found that really smart people, when they did this stuff about gun control, where they would give them data, and sometimes the data would support gun control. It would be between gun control laws, and sometimes it would contradict it. And they found that people basically just believed the stuff that they didn't, and the contradictory data they would make up an excuse for. But the interesting thing was that I think really intelligent people were even better at basically making up rationales for why you shouldn't believe the contradictory data. So, because we're very good at fooling ourselves. So it takes a real gift to be able to get people to step back and question their assumptions.
Sometimes I find, John, the more educated a person is, the more confident they are in their belief system or their conclusion, and the more close-minded they are in having a conversation around it. It always puzzled me. Here are such people who have mental acuity, they have interest, and then they get into a logjam, a mental logjam where they can't entertain. Now, always there are the other side, the educated, who just love to hear something contrary because they can play with it, But I often wondered why the people who are so certain about things could really stay that way. And I have no idea. I just think it's ruinous.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that our perceptions change on life, I think, as life changes around us. And I am waiting for the society to come back, the culture to come back to more of an even keel. The eternal verities, as you said, the self-help books earlier on were better books.
Right.
Perseverance, if it feels good, do it is not really useful. Right. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Just wonderful. So what do we learn here? First of all, you have a lot of say on your life. And one of the things you must learn to do early in life is recognize the guiding principle is a goals and then self-control to do it. And recognize you are not the same person in every part of the day, but recognize that there are times where you're just, I call it fresh, you could say whatever, and recognize when that stops, recognize the importance of eating, preferably good food, and recognize that life has its ups and downs, and try and stay steady with your loved ones, And if you're a libertarian, I think in a certain sense it's an advantage because you give people space to be who they are. And that's a wonderful gift you can give people. And the better gift even is to hear them, to really listen. That is a gift. That's a gift he has, and that's the gift you can make to the people in your lives. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
To contact Junia, send her an email at info@juniadone.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadone.com. Thanks for joining us. See you next time for Uncommon Sense with Junia Doan.
Local productions on QTV are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Junia Doan, and I do a program called Uncommon Sense. And my guest, John Tierney, is going to discuss radishes and cookies and what do they have to do with self-control. Join me when I next talk to John Tierney.